This past weekend was UFC 300, Alex Pereira versus Jamahal Hill, and it was the most stacked UFC fight card of all time. And it turned out to be one of the best UFC fight cards of all time after everything played out. And there was a lot that we learned from UFC 300, and I'm going to go through my biggest takeaways from UFC 300. And usually I do top 3 takeaways and a couple honorable mentions. But once I started compiling my list, I realized this list was a mile long. So this is going to be my top 5 takeaways from UFC 300. And I'm also going to have a bunch of honorable mentions. I'm going to start with the honorable mentions. Then I'm going to go from 5 to 1. 1 being my biggest takeaway from UFC 300. Let's jump right into it with my first honorable mention. And that is that Bo Nickal, he is bottom of the barrel MMA. Bottom of the barrel MMA. And people don't want to admit it for whatever reason. I don't understand. I understand that he has promise. I understand that he has this wrestling background. I understand that he's only 5-0. But what I'm saying is he is bottom level of the UFC caliber of fighter in the UFC currently. He is literally just scraping that bottom barrel. He's struggling with Cody Bumditch. He's getting shucked off by Cody Bumditch. And honestly, when I saw Bo Nickal out there on Saturday night, struggling with Cody Bumditch, I said, you know what? After watching this performance, I would beat the literal dog shit out of Bo Nickal. I would go in there, I would ragdoll him, I would dump him on his head, I would Batista bomb him. If I could, I'd set up one of those nice WWE wooden tables, I'd put him right through that wooden table, and then I'd pin him for a 3 count, or maybe Herb Dean wants to throw a leg drop or a people's elbow on him afterwards. I would slaughter Bo Nickal, okay? And if you think that's annoying, if you think that's ridiculous, oh, well, then you're with me, because the reason Bo Nickal's so annoying is because he's basically a teacher's pet and he's a hold me back guy, okay? I'm just making a point here. Bo Nickal talks about all the elite talent on the roster, guys who have actually fought decent fighters. He's like, yeah, I would destroy Hamzat. I would absolutely wreck Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. I don't remember one of those guys he mentioned. And he has no experience. So stay in your lane. That's the point I'm making. I'm not actually saying I would whoop Bo Nickal. But I'm glad anyone that got annoyed, anyone that's jumping down in the comments, Joey, how could you possibly say this? Well, you better start getting on Bo Nickal's case, because that's all he does is fight scrubs and then talks about, oh yeah, I would beat elite competition. Even though he knows the UFC and Daddy Dana White is never going to give him elite competition, at least not for a long time. That's why when Bo was down about his shit performance on one of the biggest fight cards of all time, Daddy Dana had to run to his side and console him. And I understand, again, he's inexperienced. He does not belong in the UFC right now. Does not belong, barely belongs, okay? I guess now the new level of talent that they keep in, he does belong. But you would have gone back 4 or 5 years ago, Bo Nickal would have been laughed out of the UFC, and people are hyping him up. And he's like, yeah, hold me back, Dana. I would smash Hamzat. I would smash Strickland. What an absolute joke. And I think he's going to get layup after layup after layup after layup until finally Daddy Dana decides to, okay, who can we cherry pick out of the top 10? Maybe a Paul Craig or something 3 years from now. Imagine where Paul Craig is if he's still in the top 15 in 3 years from now. I don't even think he's in the top 15 right now. Let's cherry pick the Paul Craig of today 3 years from now, and let's get Bo Nickal into that top 10. And even then, he might get exposed badly. But what I saw against Cody Bumditch was a horrendous performance. I don't ever want to hear him talking about guys who were in the top 10 of the middleweight division ever again, at least not for a long time, until he proves himself a little bit more. Moving on to my next honorable mention. And I hate to complain. I really hate to complain. But there's a couple complaints that I have that kind of have come out of this card. And that is that the BMF title is here to stay. And some of you guys may not care about that. It's a WWE gimmick belt that the UFC throws out there, and they're going to throw more of them out there. Holloway's going down to 45. He's going to fight Topuria. So now the BMF and the Undisputed are going to be in unison now. Oh, well, guess what? They're going to find 2 other guys who they want to throw as a headliner for a pay-per-view, and they're going to be like, oh, this is for a BMF title. It's just WWE-esque, and the reason I have a problem with it is because it's a slippery slope. Next thing you know, they're going to make another title. Next thing you know, they're going to wake up a women's BMF title, as someone talked about recently. It's annoying as hell. And as much as I love the Holloway Gaethje fight once we actually saw it, as much as the finish was crazy, it cemented the BMF title. And Dana White, and I even may make another video on this in general, Dana White was like, the BMF belt isn't a gimmick. It isn't a gimmick. He literally said that at the post-fight presser. Delusional, living in fantasy world, and I'm hopeful that somehow the BMF title dies off, but it's not. And it's just going to be a way to, you know, pretend like certain guys are the best in the world when really they're not. And it's just, they're going to end up making more belts and more belts and more belts, and it's going to be convoluted. And eventually it's going to be what people tell me boxing now is, with all these different belts that, you know, a lot of the fan base can't even understand exactly what's going on. At least what I've heard. I don't really follow boxing. Moving on to my next honorable mention. And this really isn't 300-esque, but I figured I'd throw it in as an honorable mention. And that is that undeserved title shots are taking over. Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. I did an entire video on this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'll link it down in the description if you want to go check it out. Dustin Poirier, 1-fight winning streak. He's getting a title shot. Who wants to see this? Who genuinely wants to see this? I certainly don't. I genuinely don't want to see that at all. And it's going to be a fight is that going to be even competitive? I don't think it is. I really don't think it is. So we're just booking undeserved title shot. And again, this is a slippery slope. Next thing you know, Conor McGregor is going to get a title shot. 1 win in the last 8 years. He's going to be, he knocked out Chandler or he robbed Chandler in a decision somehow. Let's give him a title shot next. And for me, I understand that the sport isn't 100% meritocracy, but let's have somewhat of a semblance of meritocracy. And I understand it's timing, but it's poor planning by the UFC that we're giving Dustin Poirier a title shot, 1-fight winning streak. I like Dustin Poirier, but I don't want to see him in a title shot. It's not that compelling. It's a big fight. It has good name value. Okay, he has a puncher's chance, but seriously, it's undeserved title shot after undeserved title shot after undeserved title shot after undeserved title shot. Is anybody else getting tired of this? Let me know down in the comments. Moving on to my next honorable mention. And this is something that I've talked about quite a bit over the last few months. And that is that we are going to be paying for UFC 300 over the next couple weeks. And let me just go through this rather quickly because I'm still in honorable mentions and we're almost 10 minutes into the video. I don't want to make it too long. Mateus Nicolau, Alex Perez, UFC Apex. UFC 301 is Alexandre Pantoja, Steve Erceg. Card is okay. I don't think 301 is that bad for a pay-per-view. Then you got Derek Lewis, Rodrigo Nascimento. Then you got Barboza versus Murphy. Then you finally have UFC 302. You get into June, and June starts to pick up some decent fights. But man, we're going to be paying for it over the next month and a half with horrible Apex card after horrible Apex card after horrible Apex card and horrible St. Louis, Missouri card. I apologize on the UFC's behalf for Lewis versus Nascimento, which is an absolute disgrace to the sport. Also, another takeaway. So we'll just say, moving on to the next honorable mention. You know what? I'll save this as the last honorable mention. So the next honorable mention, and I'm going to just start zipping through these really fast because I'm already spending too much time on this video. Next honorable mention is that Justin Gaethje's career may be over. He's already in his mid-30s. He took a lot of damage against Max Holloway, and he got slumped out cold. The nose was broken badly in the first round. And if you guys know, if you followed the careers of some other fighters, notoriously Rory McDonald, once that nose gets cracked a certain way, a lot of the time it's just never the same. And it affects guys every single fight. I think Dominic Reyes had this issue as well. And then you account to the fact that Justin Gaethje's been in a lot of wars. He got slept badly in this fight. He took a lot of damage prior to getting slept badly. And he has that nose that's busted badly. It may be the end of Justin Gaethje. It truly may be the end of Justin Gaethje, mid-30s at lightweight. That's really, really sad. That's actually really, really sad. I thought it could have been the end of Max Holloway. Going into the fight, I'm like, Gaethje's going to sleep him. I was dead wrong on that. But seeing the damage that he took, seeing the KO that he took, and oh man, sometimes I told you guys, I say this all the time. I'll say it again. I know some of you guys are probably tired of hearing about it. We have to appreciate these guys in that very small moment in time, that small window where they are at the top of their game. They are the elite of the elite, and they are a special moment in time in their career. Justin Gaethje's window could have closed. It could have closed at UFC 300. We won't know for another couple of years. You know, we didn't know when Tony Ferguson lost to Gaethje that Tony was going to have the slide that he did afterwards. You don't know it at the time. It hits you later, and you're like, oh, Gaethje took Ferguson's soul. You realize that down the line. There may be a point in time, a year from now, 2 years from now, where we're looking back at 300 and like, damn, Holloway really took Justin Gaethje's soul. You know, he got revenge for Tony Ferguson. So, honestly, Justin Gaethje, there's a decent probability that this could send his career trajectory from going like this to just going into the toilets. And it actually makes me really, really sad. Moving on to my next honorable mention, and that is that light heavyweight is full of idiots. I don't understand how dumb these light heavyweights are. Why is everyone like, yeah, I'm going to stand with Alex Pereira? Jamahal Hill, you know, I'm going to stand with Alex Pereira. Honestly, let's just make that another honorable mention. We'll combine this into one honorable mention. But one, light heavyweights are dumb. But two, Jamahal Hill's confidence and cockiness could have potentially cost him this fight. I'm not going to set the sole blame on that. But why are these guys looking at Alex Pereira, who's a long-time, successful, multi-time champion in kickboxing, successful at middleweight against one of the best kickboxers in Israel Adesanya, and like, yeah, I got this. I'm not going to grapple at all. When Alex Pereira's grappling is literally dog shit. He made Israel Adesanya, who's not a grappler, look like Khabib Nurmagomedov. He made Jan Blachowicz look like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist, taking his back, body lock immediately. Yuri went out there and struck with him for far too long. I know he took him down in the first round. Went out there and struck with him for far too long. Jamahal Hill comes in. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to grapple at all. I'm gonna take him out on the feet. You got slept badly, and he embarrassed you and he memed you badly. So Jamahal Hill, complete idiot. And you know, that's a little bit harsh. I'm being a little bit harsh there because the fight only did last a couple minutes. Maybe he would have started to incorporate the grappling. So let me take that back a little bit. But just the way he's acting leading into the fight, like, yeah, I'm gonna stand and bang with him, and I'm gonna put him out. It's just not a smart move, and it just seems like, I think Magomed Ankalaev came out recently and said, I'm not gonna grapple with him. I'm gonna knock him out. Why are these guys brain dead at light heavyweight? Are they genuinely brain dead? I mean, I know Jamahal Hill, you know, had the tune-up fight against his brother, and you know he didn't have to worry about the knockout power coming back from his brother. He just plucked him and knocked his teeth out in front of his wife and his own children. But against a guy like Alex Pereira, who has nasty power in his left hand, against a guy who is historically a successful kickboxer and just knocked out Yuri Prochazka, who's known for his chin. Yeah, let me go out there and not even mix in the takedown early to sap his energy, because Pereira's biggest hole is his grappling, and then his second biggest hole is his stamina. Maybe that's a little bit overblown, but we've seen issues with his stamina before. Makes absolutely no sense. The light heavyweight division's stupid, and Jamahal Hill's stupid for not shooting a takedown and not attempting to grapple. And honestly, it felt like, and again, we don't know from 3 minutes, it felt like that truly was not part of the game plan at all. If that's what it felt like. But we needed more time to truly realize that. Moving on to my last honorable mention, and somehow we're already 14 minutes into this video, and that is just me laughing at the people who complained about UFC 300 nonstop, whether it's the fans on Twitter, whether it's other content creators, whether it's you. If you remember who you are, if you were in my chat or in my Discord saying UFC 300 sucks, blah, 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 blah. And for some reason, I've had people come at me and comment in my comments and tweet to me and send me messages. Joey, all you did was complain about UFC 300 and look how good it is. I have multiple videos. UFC 300 is massively underrated. UFC 300 is probably the greatest fight card of all time. UFC 300 this, UFC 300 that. I had some complaints about certain fights, but they were mild critiques because I'm analyzing the fight and talking about the news. So after seeing how UFC 300 played out, I'm just laughing at those idiots who just whine to literally whine for no reason. You know, I know Dana White set these crazy expectations, but in my opinion, the card from top to bottom was massive on paper before the fight card ever happened. And the way it played out was a thing of beauty, an absolute thing of beauty. And we have to applaud the UFC for that. So I just wanted to add that. That was the one I was going to add earlier, but I figured I'd save that for my last honorable mention, is just laughing at the people. UFC 300 sucks. Oh my God. We got three women's MMA fights, blah, blah, blah. Oh no. Oh no. What am I ever going to do? Oh my God. Yeah. Those people were straight up idiots. And you could see this coming from a mile away. But let's move on to my actual list. Again, a top 5 takeaways, because there was so much that I took away from UFC 300. Honestly, I could have made this list so much longer. But let's start with number 5. And this is going to be one that honestly is going to be maybe a little bit of a hot take. But that is that Charles Oliveira fans are absolutely delusional. And this is the part that's a hot take, because that one's honestly true. Charles Oliveira is probably never going to be able to fight for a title again, or not be able to win a title again. He may end up getting a shot because of his star power. He does have a bit of star power in the lightweight division. But people acting like Charles Oliveira beat Arman Tsarukyan are just completely biased and Charles Oliveira fanboys. I'm a massive Charles Oliveira fanboy, but I'm not biased for him. I'm not scoring fights for him because I like his fight style and I've been a huge fan of him for the last 10 years. But he clearly lost that fight. Honestly, I scored all 3 rounds for Arman. People are going to say that's a hot take. Oh, well, he almost got a guillotine, blah, 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 blah. Almost getting chokes doesn't make up for the fact that you got outstruck on the feet, outdamaged on the feet, and outdamaged on the ground and controlled on the ground. For multiple minutes, minute after minute after minute after minute. Arman clearly won that fight, completely dominated the second round, completely dominated the third round outside of the choke attempt in the last, 15, 20 seconds. First round, you could make a case for Oliveira because he did have, the submission, and then he was in full mount and he landed a little bit of damage, but then Arman reversed and controlled him and did damage as well. So that's why I scored it for Arman. But these people are crazy. There's no way you score 2 or 3 for Charles Oliveira unless somehow you're just completely biased against Arman and biased for Charles Oliveira. It is delusional. But as far as Charles Oliveira, ever being a title contender, I mean, his name will always kind of be there. But what I really mean by it is these certain matchups, Charles Oliveira is not winning. If you're a decent wrestler, offensive wrestler, and you have good enough jiu-jitsu that you don't have to worry about Oliveira throwing up submission attempts off his back, you're going to beat Charles Oliveira. Look how easily Islam Makhachev dispatched Charles Oliveira, and I picked Oliveira going in that fight. Look how easily Arman controlled him on the ground in that second and third round. Beat the piss out of him with ground and pound in that second round. Absolutely destroyed him with elbows. At this point, I don't see Oliveira beating that matchup. That's just a nightmare matchup for him. That's his kryptonite. So as long as you have a guy like Islam at the top of the division, as long as you have a guy like Arman, who's now number 1 contender, obviously he's not getting the next title shot. But those are the 2 guys, I don't expect Dustin to win. Obviously he could pull off a massive upset. Those are the guys that are going to be at the top of the division for a while. Islam's still relatively young. Oliveira's in his mid-30s. I think Islam's like 32, if I'm not mistaken. Arman's 27. And you have other guys, kind of lingering, coming up the division. Mateusz Gamrot. I'm not ready to write Charles off against Mateusz Gamrot. Even look at Beneil. Beneil was out grappling him early. So these guys that can hold Charles down and beat him up and not worry about the submission threat, they're going to beat Charles every time unless they get clipped early. I hate to say it, but I don't think Charles Oliveira, I think his time as champion has come to an end. He unfortunately lost about missing weight in the fight against Justin Gaethje. I don't think he'll ever hold on to that lightweight belt again. And that pains me to say as a guy who predicted Oliveira to be a champion for so many years. And I felt vindicated when he went out there and just spammed those left hooks against Michael Chandler to get that title. I just don't think he's going to hold the lightweight title ever again. I don't think he may fight for the title again at some point just because of his name value. But that cut he suffered 2 weeks out from the Islam fight may have been his last opportunity to fight for a belt. He's lost 2 out of his last 3, but also his fans are just completely delusional. I just can't believe they're acting like somehow Charles should have won that fight against Arman just because he held onto his neck for 15 seconds in the third round. Completely delusional, devoid of all logic. Moving on to number 4. My number 4 takeaway is Alex Pereira got screwed at UFC 300. Because the card was so massive and because you had that crazy moment with Max Holloway, maybe I'm crazy because there was a decent amount of talk. I feel like Alex Pereira's knockout got overshadowed. That nasty left hook, that little, taunt of Jamahal Hill, I feel like it got overlooked. And honestly, even though people act like I hate Alex Pereira for some reason because they're just, Alex Pereira fans are completely delusional as well. You pick against him, somehow you hate him. But as much as people think that, I realize too, he's one of my favorite fighters. He's constantly active, which I absolutely love. He has an aesthetically pleasing fight style, and he's one of the elite. Does he have shit grappling that nobody exposes? Yes. Do I still think he's kind of overrated in the fact that people are like, he's a GOAT. He has the same amount of title defenses as Michael Bisping. And people are acting like he's a GOAT. Yes. But at the end of the day, that was a crazy win. I think that honestly was the performance of the night. What he did to Jamahal Hill, the way he brutally slapped him in the first round without really taking any damage. And then he gets on the mic afterwards and calls the fight at UFC 301 in Brazil. How can you not love that guy? How can you not love that guy? You know, it's weird because MMA fans are so fickle. People are like, oh, you're biased against Jamahal Hill because, you know, whatever, you don't like Jamahal Hill and you said this and you said that and you called him out for his domestic violence. But then I picked Jamahal Hill and you're like, oh, you don't like Alex Pereira because he beat Israel Adesanya 2 years ago and then lost his title back. And the KO was crazy and you thought it was crazy and you picked Adesanya to win that fight. So for some reason, that means you hate Pereira. It's the fan base of Alex Pereira is completely delusional as well. But overall, the reason I had this takeaway is I just wanted to praise Alex Pereira. That performance was phenomenal. That KO was phenomenal. That taunt was phenomenal. He embarrassed Jamahal Hill. It was a beautiful finish. It was a phenomenal performance. It was a great call out afterwards, the fight in Brazil. I love the activity. I love the fight style. The power is unbelievable. And luckily, he's at light heavyweight where even though I believe he's 36 or 37, 36, 37 isn't that old for light heavyweight. So I'm hoping he can stick around for a while. I love watching him fight. I'm curious how he's going to look against a Magomed Ankalaev who may mix in the grappling, even though he says he's not. We'll see if he actually does. I can't wait to see his next title defense. I'm hoping that he stays relatively active, even if he doesn't fight at 301, which honestly I think is kind of a mistake if he doesn't make that quick of a turnaround. But I'm hoping to see him in the very near future. I don't know where he would fight, though, because he's not going to fight in June. He's not going to fight in July, most likely, because that's going to be in the UK. August is going to be in Perth. It's not going to be in August. So maybe September. Maybe Alex Pereira returns in September against Magomed Ankalaev. But then at that point, they'll probably push it to October in Abu Dhabi. I know some people don't want to hear that, but that could be the option as well. So Alex Pereira, I feel like he got screwed a little bit. I didn't feel like he got as much shine as he should have because of the fact the card was such a mega card, unbelievable magnitude of a UFC card. And the performance after performance outside of Bo Nickel and really Aljamain Sterling's performance were just amazing. So I feel like a little bit, especially the Max Holloway fight, kind of overshadowed Pereira's amazing knockout of Jamahal Hill in the very first round. Moving up on my list to number 3, and that is that Arman Tsarukyan may be the only guy at lightweight that can dethrone Islam Makhachev. I'm looking at the lightweight rankings, okay? And I'm looking at, whether it be Dustin Poirier, who's getting the next title shot, whether it be Max Holloway, who's now in the top 10, but the rankings are really kind of wonky, but they always have been. But, you name any contender. You name Charles Oliveira. You name Mateusz Gamrot. You name Rafael Fiziev. You name any guy under the sun in the lightweight division right now. Renato Moicano even. I don't see anybody that's beaten Islam Makhachev right now. I don't see anybody that's beaten Islam Makhachev currently. The only person that I can see beating Islam Makhachev right now, and that I think would have a significant chance to beat Islam Makhachev, would be Arman Tsarukyan. Because first off, I see in him what I saw in Charles Oliveira many, many years ago. Every single fight he's improved. Whether it's his striking looks a little bit better, which it did against Charles Oliveira. It looked actually significantly better, specifically his hands. His kicks have always been really good. His grappling looked unbelievable. His defensive jiu-jitsu looked unbelievable. His durability looked unbelievable. He took like 1 or 2 big shots from Oliveira. His submission defense looked unbelievable. His offensive grappling looked unbelievable. We've seen in the past, against Gamrot, the scrambles in that Gamrot fight as Gamrot's trying to wrestle him were unbelievable. And I think he is the guy. If you told me right now somebody is going to dethrone Islam Makhachev, my pick would be Arman Tsarukyan. And he's 27 years old. He's the number 1 contender, and he made a smart decision. I think he made a very smart decision. Even though I'm disappointed, I would have loved to seen him have that quick turnaround and fight Islam. He's already the number 1 contender. So why turn around on 6 weeks and risk not being 100%? Why do that? He turned it down. Dustin Poirier is getting the title fight, which I'm not happy with because it's undeserved. But if Islam wins that fight, which on paper he should win that fight, Arman is next in line, and Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan is on my short list of fights that I cannot wait to see for the back half of 2024. How crazy is it? We're almost halfway through 2024. I don't know where the time is going. But Arman Tsarukyan fighting for the lightweight title against Islam Makhachev, tell me that's not a straight-up heater. Tell me that's not a straight-up heater. Arman has the skills to beat Islam. And he takes another 4, 5, 6 months. Let's see. Yeah, 6 months would be October. I would assume it would happen in Abu Dhabi. Islam said he wouldn't mind fighting in Madison Square Garden either, so maybe it could happen there. I have a feeling Madison Square Garden in November is probably going to be Jones versus Stipe. They're going to try to rekindle that from last year. But maybe they put it in Madison Square Garden. Islam versus Arman Tsarukyan is a hardcore fan's dream. And I think, if the UFC really gets behind that and promotes that the right way, that is a fight that I'm really looking to see, and I'm really excited for. And either way, the takeaway is Arman Tsarukyan is the only guy in the lightweight division that can beat Islam Makhachev right now. As I'm looking at the top 15, he is the only guy that I could perceivably see beating Islam Makhachev. And I know some people were kind of down on his performance against Charles Oliveira. I thought it was a phenomenal performance against Charles Oliveira. Oliveira is very, very dangerous. And Arman went out there and neutralized him and beat the piss out of him in the second round specifically. Avoided the sub attempts. I can't wait to see when he finally fights Islam Makhachev later this year. If Islam gets by Dustin Poirier, which I expect him to do. Moving on to my number 2 takeaway from UFC 300. And that is that Max Holloway bet on himself and he won. And he won times 1,000,000. He won times 10 million. He won times 10 billion. Because I thought it was a massive mistake of Max Holloway to take this fight. I thought back when this fight was announced, Max Holloway should have waited, and he should have waited to see what happened in Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. Because what I thought was, if Volkanovski loses, Max Holloway's a shoo-in to step in there against Topuria next. If Volkanovski wins, okay, it's a little bit of a weird scenario for Max. I think if anyone could have got a 4th shot against Volkanovski, it would have been Max Holloway. But I thought he should at least wait it. And then once he took a fight against Justin Gaethje, I couldn't have been more wrong about the fight. I thought Gaethje's a nightmare matchup for him. I thought Gaethje was going to beat him up at lightweight. I thought Gaethje was going to chop those legs and land nasty power shots. Not only did Max Holloway go out there and beat Justin Gaethje pretty soundly. Gaethje had a round or even 2 on one judge's scorecards. It wasn't the blowout some people are acting it to be. It wasn't even the fight that some people are acting it to be, acting like this was the greatest fight of all time. This wasn't even close to Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira. Let's be honest here, okay? The fight is now overhyped because of the finish. But that being said, the finish was an all-time great. It was a historic moment. And the fact that Holloway was up, he knew he was up, he knew he was out ahead, even if somehow you had it 2-2, which I had it 3-1 going into the 5th. Max had already won the 5th round. He rocked him, pieced him up against the fence, clearly won the 5th round. He decides, you know what? Let me point to the center of the cage and let's just throw down. And while he had to know, okay, I'm less compromised than Justin Gaethje right now, and I think I'm fresher, and I think I'm faster, and I think I'll get the better of this exchange, he still took a risk there. Gaethje clipped him with a couple shots in that final exchange, and then he lands that right hand that absolutely deadens Justin Gaethje in the center of the cage. That moment will go down in UFC history. It will go down as one of the greatest knockouts of all time. It'll go down as one of the craziest moments of all time. It'll go down as the biggest moment on the biggest card of all time. And on top of all that, you can throw all that in the trash. He can basically get anything he wants right now. I think that sets him up for a fight against Ilia Topuria, which Volkanovski would be making a mistake if he didn't let them fight. I know Volkanovski wants his rematch. If I was him, I'd be letting Max take that fight. Because worst case scenario, you get a little bit more time and then you fight Topuria if Topuria beats Holloway. But if Holloway wins, okay, you don't get your rematch against Topuria, but you get to fight for your title against a guy you already have 3 wins over. One being a couple years ago where you absolutely beat the brakes off him. So confidence has to be at an all-time high. Plus, you rested up your chin and your brain, and now you can go in there with high confidence against a guy you've already beaten multiple times. And honestly, at this point, Holloway's still very young. I know he's been around forever, but he's been in the UFC since he was super young. I remember seeing him on UFC 172. He was on the prelims at UFC 172. I believe he fought Andre Fili at the time. I was at that card live. It was in 2014, I believe it was. And I remember telling my fiance, I said, you know what? I think Max Holloway, I think he's a future champion. And that was so long ago. And then he lost the belt. He became champion eventually, lost the belt to Volkanovski. And then it's looking like, okay, Volkanovski's a couple years older than him, so what I was thinking is maybe Max is going to wait Volkanovski out and then be able to get the belt back, because I always thought he was the second best featherweight. Well, now Topuria has shaken up the whole division, and now Max has his KO. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't know, though. They love Volkanovski. Volkanovski's done everything the kid's done everything we've ever asked of him. They might say, okay, we're going to give Volkanovski the shot, but right now I think it makes a whole lot of sense to do Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway, and even if not, if Max Holloway really wants it, he could probably skip over Arman for a title shot. I wouldn't like that personally. I wouldn't like it for Max or for Arman or for the lightweight division. But if he truly wanted to, I think the UFC would probably indulge him, because the UFC loves that Max gave him that viral moment at UFC 300. They love that they can post that everywhere. And, you know, that's what draws in casuals, those crazy moments like that where it looks like a bar fight and then you have a crazy, spectacular finish. So Max bet on himself, went out there and won the fight, and now he basically has the UFC eaten out of the palm of his hands. And not only that, he got his purse, he got his win bonus, but he also got $600,000 for performance bonus and fight of the night bonus. Now, me personally, I don't think it was fight of the night. The finish made it fight of the night kind of in a way, but I think the fight of the night was Yuri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. I think that was the fight of the night because Yuri's comeback was unbelievable. The finish was crazy and everything. The fight was amazing from start to finish. But either way, Max got $600K on top of what he was already getting paid, which for a UFC fighter, I know some people think everyone's a millionaire. That's a lot of money for UFC fighters. So Max Holloway, great moment at UFC 300, bet on himself. Now he has the UFC eaten out of the palm of his hand. And I pray they put Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway together next. I cannot wait to see it. Moving on to my last takeaway, my number one takeaway. And this is kind of unique. And this is something that we were talking about the other day in a live stream. And my number one takeaway is the UFC needs to have a UFC 300 caliber card every single year, once per year. I don't care what they have to do. Again, I know we had a bunch of shitty Apex cards behind us, okay? That happened in the past. I know we got a bunch of shitty Apex cards coming in the future. It was worth it. It was worth it. UFC 300 was such a phenomenal card. And I know it's not really these events anymore, but back in the day, the UFC used to always have 3 really big cards a year. They used to have the Super Bowl card. They used to have International Fight Week card. And then they used to have the New Year's Eve card. They don't really do that anymore. They still have the International Fight Week, but they don't really do the New Year's Eve card anymore. They usually take off. They normally don't do the Super Bowl card anymore, which is crazy because they used to really stack those cards, which would be incredible cards. They don't do it anymore. They have stacked cards similar to the way those cards were stacked. But what I'm saying is once a year, whether it's International Fight Week, whether it's MSG, I don't even care where on the calendar it falls. I really, truly don't care. I think they need to go all out like they did for UFC 300. I think it grows the sport. As a fan, I've never really, we felt this before with other stacked cards, but not to the extent of UFC 300. Having that hyped feeling, fight after fight, after fight, after fight, after fight, after fight, is something magical. And I really think the UFC can not only make a lot of money off of it. I'm sure the pay-per-view buys did well for UFC 300. I think they can grow the sport significantly. I think they can grow the business of the UFC itself significantly. And I would love once a year, they just go all out, prelim to main event, stack it as crazy as UFC 300. I don't care if you have to cancel a couple cards. Do one card that month and make it UFC 300. I think the net gain, I know you're losing some events, and I know, okay, contract situations with ESPN and whatnot. You guys got to figure out those logistics behind the scenes. I think we need a UFC 300 caliber card once a year, every single year, and I think the majority of fans would agree with me. I think UFC 300 felt so special. It felt so amazing, and it felt good for a change to care about every single fight. It felt good to be excited. You know, some obviously more than others, but it felt good to be excited for that very first prelim and excited for the next fight and excited for the next fight. I know some people would say, oh, I wasn't that excited for Marina Rodriguez, Jessica Andrade. It was still a very good fight and it meant something to the division. I need that. Now that I've tasted that for 300, we didn't even get that for 200. Don't get me wrong, 200 was good. 300 blew it out of the water on paper and in reality. We need one of those once per year. So I don't know how we campaign for it. Twitter, Instagram comments, Dana White's live stream, We need to start media members when they're at press conferences, fans when they're at press conferences where they get to ask questions. We need to start a concerted effort to let Dana White and the UFC know once a year. You pick the date. Obviously, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be every summer. It doesn't have to be every spring. It doesn't have to be every winter. Put one of these cards together, because at the end of the day, it's a net positive. You're going to make a killing in terms of ticket sales. You're going to make a killing in terms of pay-per-view sales. And you're going to make a killing in terms of growing the sport. I guarantee there were fringe fans who tuned into UFC 300 who were going to be lifelong fans now. And that's money. That is return on your investment over and over and over again. I absolutely loved UFC 300. I loved every minute of it. I need another one. And the fact that here's what I'll leave you guys with. Here's an analogy I'll leave you with. Do you remember when you were a kid and you were so excited for Christmas? You know, you were so excited for Christmas. I grew up poor and I was always still excited for Christmas. And the day after Christmas, you'd be like, damn. Obviously, you're not saying damn if you're like 9 years old, but you get my point. You're like, oh, we got to wait a whole nother year for Christmas. It was almost depressing the day after Christmas. I feel that way as an adult after UFC 300, but I don't know when the next one's coming. I don't know when the next UFC 400. I can't wait that long. Another 8 years. Another 8 years. I can't wait that long. We need a UFC 300 caliber card every single year. Get on Dana White's ass. Get on the UFC's ass. YouTube comments, Instagram, Twitter. We need a UFC 300 caliber card every single year. I'm beating it into your guys' brains because I need it. I'm looking into the future and I'm like, oh, we have some good cards. I'm looking forward to International Fight Week, and Michael Chandler's got one dude on his mind, and I'm looking forward to this and I'm looking forward to that. I need that huge event, that event of such a magnitude that we're thinking about it 6 months out. I need that. I need that every single year. At least once. Let me know what you guys think of my takeaways down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. If there's anything I missed, also, any takeaways you had from the card, let me know down in the comments as well. I'm sure there's things that I missed. There was so much to cover. This is now a 40-minute video. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.